And evicted by penguins. We look at Australian attempts to empty an estate to make room for a colony of little penguins. We'll see if an Australian plan to vacate an island for a penguin colony to colonise is actually working.
It's not often in this world that humans are pushed out of their homes by penguins. But in the suburb on Phillip Island, around 137 kilometers south of the Australian city of Melbourne, the world's largest colony of a species known as the little penguin has done just that. It's a place where tourists have flocked to since the 1920s to see the nightly penguin parade. In 1985, the state government took an extraordinary step. It decided to buy every piece of property on the Summerland Peninsula and return the land to the penguins. Peter Dan is a research director at Phillip Island Nature Parks. He's worked there since the early 80s and was one of the authors of a study that led to the Summerland property buyback. He described to me how this worked.
It was a very complicated process, but far more civilized than I expected. We determined the trends in the penguin population, which were dire. The population was going down very rapidly, and there were a number of obvious causes, and one of them was predation by introduced foxes. But there was a lot of causes associated with the coastal village, which was known as the Summerland Estate in those days, and particularly penguins getting run over on the roads because the estate was actually built in the middle of a breeding colony of penguins, and the people driving back and forth at night to their homes would run over penguins. Their dogs would some of their dogs would kill penguins. There were a number of important things that were causing the decline of the penguin.
And Peter, many times a settlement has been moved for a dam, a property development, a mine, a power facility, but not for a single wildlife species.
That's correct. As far as I can tell, it's never happened before that it's been done for wildlife conservation. So it's a very significant event.
And this move, Peter, hasn't just benefited the penguins, it has been profitable as well.
It has, because the penguin population has increased now from the 1980s, when it was in decline, from 12,000 to about 32 to 34,000 breeding birds. And that provides employment for a large number of people through the ecotourism operation here that's on the island.
And what does this say, Peter, about Australia's reliance on wildlife and natural resources? How important is it to look after these natural resources?
It's absolutely critical, not just for the sort of quality of life of Australians, but for the whole world. There's nowhere else where you can see penguins this easily and this many little penguins. And so it's extremely important from a global perspective also.
And share with us, Peter, about the penguin knits. Why does a penguin need a sweater?
Penguins are very susceptible to being oiled when they're at sea if there's oil pollution about, and it affects them in a couple of ways. But first of all, it maps their plumage and causes them to become hypothermic, so they lose a lot of heat. So when they come ashore, they're in very dire straits, and they also try to preen the oil off their plumage. And these little jumpers, which I think you've got a photo of there, or I've got one here. These little jumpers.
There you go. The penguin wearing a sweater.
Exactly. So these jumpers stop the birds preening the oil and get poisoning themselves, but also it keeps them warmer while they're waiting to be properly cleaned and rehabilitated.
And briefly, Peter, you've worked at the park since the early 1980s. You are dedicated and love these penguins.
Yes, it's no regrets. It was a job that I took on for 3 years, but I've been here ever since. And there's absolutely no regrets. It's been a very satisfying work.
And Kasia, that was Peter Dan, and it's now on my bucket list, Kasia, to visit the penguins at the Phillip Island Nature Parks.
Rico, you won't believe this. Our director was just telling me how he has been there many years ago, but he did go there and he saw those penguins do the little parade. Brilliant stuff.